Welcome to Foundational You with Dr. Dean Hackett, the home of biblical teaching and cultural impact. We are so glad that you joined us for today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Dean, read his blog, and find more episodes at fdeanhackett.com. Now for today's episode.
How do you make heads or tails out of the headlines that we see in our news broadcasts each day, or the level of corruption in our current political atmosphere? What do we make of the level of antichrist fervor that is being displayed in school board meetings, on the movie screens, and talked about by the media pundits? How do we handle the distortion of gender and human sexuality and the open display of deviant sexual behavior in this hypersexualized culture? Well, there are a multitude of ways that we can respond, but I think the first response needs to be taken by a disciple of Jesus Christ in the same way that was taken by the disciples in the New Testament. Let me remind you, the culture in which Jesus was initially building his church was not dissimilar to the culture in which we are living. The Roman Hellenic culture was hypersexualized. It was decidedly anti-Christ. And the entire political scene, including the selection of Jewish high priests, was operated in corruption, bribery, intrigue, and even murder. Thank you for joining me in this podcast today. I'm Dean Hackett, and I'm glad that you have joined me as we're going to be looking at how should we be living today. You know, 2 days before his betrayal, 2 days before Jesus had his final Passover meal with the disciples and his arrest, the disciples came to Jesus and asked him two questions. The same two questions that I think we need to be asking ourselves today. I'm quoting from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24 and verse 3. They said, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Questions we need to be asking ourselves right now. When will these things be, and what will be the sign of Jesus Christ's second coming and the end of the age? Well, Jesus answered their question throughout the 24th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. And then in chapter 25, he gave them a couple of parables that related to what he had just taught them. Jesus answered their question by giving them three arenas of signs. You know, what are the signs? What are the signs of your coming and of the end of the age? And so Jesus gave them three arenas of signs that would let them know how close they were getting to his coming and the end of the age, or the last days. The first arena is found in Matthew 24, verses 4 to 8. And Jesus said, "These are the beginning of sorrows," or in the Greek, "These are the labor pains that's going to eventually give birth to the last days and to my second coming." And in that arena of signs, Jesus said there's going to be a rise of false Christs. There's going to be wars, rumors of wars, famines, pestilence. And then in verses 9 to 14, he gives them a second arena of signs. And those, he said, this is when the last days are here. And he said there's going to be a rise of Christian persecution, and that all nations will hate Christians. There's going to be betrayal. There'll be a hatred of one another. There'll be a rise of false prophets. There's going to be a proliferation of lawlessness. And in that proliferation of lawlessness and moral depravity, God kind of love, the kind of love that gives self-worth and affirmation and encouragement to another human being, is going to grow cold and will eventually die. And he said, not only that, but the gospel will be preached in all the world. And then he said, those who endure to the end will be saved. Wow. And then in verse 15 to 22, he gave us the third arena of signs. And this, he said, is going to be when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. He said, when you see that happening, then will be the great tribulation. Wow. Wow. The abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel is found in the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verses 24 to 27. In the last days, there's going to be a world leader that will rise to power, and he's going to make a 7-year peace agreement with the nation of Israel. But he's going to break that agreement 3.5 years into the 7 years, so halfway through. And then he's going to set himself up in the temple to be worshiped as if he were God. And Jesus said these words, listen closely. Unless those days were shortened, no man would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Wow. Wow. As disciples of Jesus Christ, if we're going to understand what's happening right now, everything that's taking place right now has to be laid over this template. These 3 arenas of signs that Jesus gave to us. The labor pains that gives birth to the last days and the coming of Jesus Christ. Those signs that clearly point to us, this is the last days. And then those signs that let us know this is going to be the time of the great tribulation. To make sense of what's happening right now, we have to take and look at that template, lay everything that's happening right now in our news, everything that's happening every day in this culture, in our nation, lay it over that template. Now we got to remember that Jesus said in Matthew 24:36, but that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. So no one knows the exact day or the exact hour of Jesus Christ's second coming and the inauguration of the last days. We don't know the day or the hour. But listen, he did say this also in just 3 verses before that. He said, so you also, when you see all these things, the 3 arenas we just talked about, when you see all these things, know that it is near, even at the door. So Jesus wants us to understand how close and how near we're getting to his second coming and the last days. We're not going to know the day or the hour, he said, but you can know it's right at the door. Why? Because he wants us to live ready. He wants us to be ready for his second coming and the initiation of the last days. Wow. And so when we look at these signs and we look at the current events, we can know that we're literally moving into the labor pains. And we know how labor pains work, right? They start off, they're strong, but boy, they start getting closer together and stronger and closer together and stronger and closer together and stronger until they're just one right on top of another and they're back to back to back to back. And then it gives birth, right? And that's what Jesus said would happen in this first arena of signs. The rising of false Christs, wars, rumors of wars, nations rising against nations, and famines and pestilence and earthquakes and natural disasters. And don't we see that? And they're just like back to back to back to back. It's like every day something is going on. Well, why? Because the labor pains are getting so close and they're so strong, they're about to give birth to the last days. And then we look at that second arena and the rise of false prophets. Well, hello, do we not see that and a proliferation of them? What about the hatred of Christians around the world and in all nations? What about betrayal? What about betrayal? And then what about the proliferation of lawlessness and moral depravity and God kind of love just dying, and the gospel being preached all around the world? I mean, it's amazing. Just one simple thing, The Chosen. Now what, 1 billion people have watched that? The gospel being proclaimed literally around the world. Are we living in this time? And then that third arena, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, where we're going to see that 7-year peace pact. During that 7 years, the third temple is going to be built. And everything is in preparation for that third temple right now. It's all prepared. The high priesthood, the ability to be able to ordain that priesthood, all the implements for the temple, the clothing for the priesthood, all the instruments, the altars. I mean, it's just there. It's just waiting. And don't we see things leading right now to crying out for that peace pact? Wow. Are we getting close? Well, we're going to take in this over the next couple of studies on this podcast, and we're going to see just how close. And we're going to take 3 things that's happening right now currently, major signs, and we're going to overlay them over this template and just see how close we really are, and then ask ourselves, how should we be living in view of this? God bless you. Thank you for joining me in this podcast. I hope that you will share and that you will encourage friends to join us. Click like and share. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us today. This Christ-centered biblical training is a ministry of Spirit Life Ministries. We hope that you are blessed by this podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. For more information or questions for Dr. Dean, please contact us at the website fdeanhackett.com.